Hi everybody, I am Miss Kaleigh and I am here to teach a directing class. I currently teach acting at Wonderland and hopefully we'll be teaching some directing and stuff like that in the future. So I went to school for broadcasting and for communications and took a whole lot of theater classes and ended up with a double major. I have a teaching degree in theater and I have directed and acted all over the country. So that's a little bit of my background. Currently I direct here in the area at both iPal and Abbey Players, and I just love it. And so I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about directing. Now, everything I say, keep in mind that as a director, you have to do what works for you and what your style is. And so some of the things that work for me may not work for everyone, but I want to give you kind of a good basis of where to start and things to think about. This class is going to be appropriate for anyone who is interested in directing in the future. So you might be a kid or a teenager that has done some theater and thought, hey, one day I might like to direct, or maybe I don't know if I would like to direct or not. So this class would be a really great way for you to kind of see, is this something I'm interested in and want to pursue further? Or maybe you're an adult and you've already done some directing in the area and you kind of want my perspective on things, or you're an adult and you're looking to direct and kind of want to know what it takes going into it and maybe what some of the most difficult things about directing are. That's what this class is for and who this class is for. So I'm going to be covering in this particular lesson what it takes to be a good director, although I certainly don't have the answers on all of that, but just kind of the things you should think about going into and what being a good director requires. And then 2, show selection, which is a fun part of being a director, but maybe more difficult and more complicated than you would think. So let's start off with what it takes to be a good director. So first off, I want to say that no one is more influential on a show and a production than a director. A lot of times, because they're not actually on stage, we tend to forget the director in all of it because they're the ones that are behind the scenes and making everything happen, kind of like a puppet master or something like that. But when I'm directing, I know that I never feel more about a production, that more of my personality and more of myself is on stage than when I'm actually directing a show as opposed to being in it. Sure, when I'm in a show and I'm on stage, like that's my particular talents being shown, but when I'm directing, it's more about what I have put into the process. It's more my vision, and that's what's showing up on stage. So I'm going to refer to this book a couple of times. It's called Play Directing by Frances Hodge. I found a used copy on Amazon, but this is my favorite directing textbook, if you will. If you're interested in learning more and you want to read up on directing and how to be a better director, this is the textbook I would start with. I'm a big learner, a person that loves education. I'm a teacher in my everyday life, and I love to read further about things. And so when it comes to directing, this is my favorite book. And I really want to read something from this book real quick. It says, it's precisely because he has so much power in the theater that so much is expected of director. Yet the curious paradox is that, like the playwright, he's not actually seen on stage, but only through the actors and the physical staging provided by the designers. So everybody else is seen on stage, the director is not. The most important thing, I believe, that it takes to be a good director, and it's in this title of this book, is communication. Notice it says analysis, communication, and style. Communication, communication, communication. Because if you cannot communicate what you want to happen in the production to the stage, then you have not been an effective director. So that means that you have to be willing to put yourself out there consistently to your team, to your producers, the people ahead of you, whatever theater it is that you're working at, and of course to your actors, your set designers, everybody that you're working with. You have to be willing to, first and foremost, communicate with them. So what does that mean? I love to open a Google folder and drop just tons of my ideas and stuff in there and put my whole team in the Google folder so they can see what I'm thinking and what my vision is from the beginning, maybe even months or years before the show starts. That is an effective way of communicating for me. once the show is cast, I love to set up a Facebook group so that I have my entire cast there and I can communicate with them regularly. Email is also essentially important. You just have to make sure that every single aspect of the show that you need to communicate to people, you have a way of getting to them and they know probably more information than they even necessarily want to know. I know that my team doesn't go look on my Google folder all the time and like, oh, what is Kaleigh looking at for the set design for this? I mean, I know that not everyone is going to be into every single thing I'm putting into that folder, but I do know that if they want to, they can go look at it and they can see my vision. Or I can say, hey, go look at that folder and kind of get an idea of what I'm going for with this production. So communication, communication, communication. In a future episode / lesson, we're going to talk about blocking and communicating with actors more specifically, but it's very, very important that you keep all lines of communication open. You can't think that I am the person that is leading this production, and so I'm going to put my vision out there and it's just going to happen. It's not going to happen unless you communicate that to your team, to your people. They can't make it happen unless they know what's going on in your head. So that is the biggest thing that it takes to be a good director. Another thing that it takes to be a good director in this area, specifically in community theater, is being a jack of all trades. In professional theater, as a director, you might be able to walk in and just say, hey, I want this set, or you're the set designer, come up with a set. You're the costume designer, come up with costumes, and so on and so forth, and they just do it. I've been in those experiences before, and it certainly looked nice. But in community theater, as the director, you have to know something about and have an idea of what you want, and maybe even execute what you want for all aspects of your show. So you might end up having to be the set designer for your show. You might end up having to be the costume designer for your show. You might end up having to design the lights, music, everything for your show. You need to know what your strengths and weaknesses are going into a production, and that's going to go into show selection, and select shows and a technical team that can pick up where you lacks. So I know that I'm not the best set designer. I designed a set in college for my set design class that I just absolutely loved, and I thought it was great. And that's the only set I've ever actually effectively designed. I put it on stage for the Little Foxes at iPal last year, and that was the first time I actually got to see my designed set on stage. But beyond that, I don't have a whole lot in here for set design. So what do I do with that? Number one, I don't pick shows that have really intricate set designs. Number two, I find people that I know are good at set design and can execute what I'm looking for and what I would like to see. And I give those people freedom. I delegate because I know that is not my thing. So that's something that I let go of, or I tell them exactly what I want, what my vision is, or I pick shows that don't require a lot of it. So you have to know what it is that is your weakness and or your strength. I am pretty good at costuming. I really enjoy costuming, and I've gotten good at it over the years. And now I'll either costume other people's shows. And so I'm not as daunted as by picking a show that I know has a lot of intricate costuming to it. I'm not a sewer, but I know several people, seamstresses in the area, that are willing to help me out and stuff like that. And I know what looks good on stage costume-wise. So that's something that doesn't scare me. But if you're not good at costuming, then you need to make sure that you have someone on your team that is. I can do a little bit of dancing, but I'm not really a choreographer. So I should either pick shows that don't have a lot of dancing or align myself with several good choreographers, which I've done, and there are several good choreographers in this area. And as a director, if you don't really dance, that is one of the things that you can really do to make sure that if you're going to be directing a musical, is an excellent, excellent choice, is align yourself with some strong choreographers. My choreographers are some of the most important people in my shows, because you're telling the story through dance, and if those people can put your vision into their dance and make it happen on stage, it can just be amazing. One example is Tiffany Poirier choreographed Side by Side by Sondheim for me at IPAL this last year, and almost every single number had choreography in it, and she perfectly executed what I was going for. But we talked all the time about everything in that show. And so she was a huge ally for me for that production, way more than an assistant director / choreographer for me. I mean, almost a co-director, because of the level of choreography in that show. So goes on to saying, you need to know what you're weak at and get people, allies on your team that can pick up that slack. Building a team. A lot of people think going in as a director, it's just all about me, and then I can pick my team later on, but I'm going to be directing the show. I honestly don't go into picking a show and show selection unless I have a team in mind and people that are like, yeah, I'll do that with you, because I know now that I need help, that I need people that can do those things for me, that can choreograph, maybe that can music direct, that can do the set, that can assistant direct for me and help me with some of that props and all of those things, stage managing. I start asking people very early on in my process. Actually, I'm on the reading committee at IPAL, and I came up with a form for IPAL for directors to submit what they're interested in production-wise and what shows they would like to do. And on the form, it says, who is your production team? Because I just think that that's so important going into a show. Now, I mean, things change, people drop out and stuff like that. But I think that having an idea of who is going to do those things that you may not be super successful at in that show, you need to find those people and utilize them and delegate and let them be creative and do their thing. Because as the director, you cannot do everything or you will drive yourself crazy. So delegate what you're comfortable delegating with. And I know that anyone that knows me and might be watching this video might be laughing, because I tend to have my hands in absolutely every part of my production, because I am very, very detail oriented, very, very hands-on. But I still give to my team that I trust and let them run with it and let them do their things, because that takes so much stress off of me. So yeah, community theater director. You might also have to be the set designer, costume designer, everything else. You might also have to be in control of your budget. There's so many management style things that go into directing. It's not, a lot of people think of directing as casting the show and blocking the show. And while those things are huge parts of directing, I would say that they're maybe 20 to 30% of the whole thing. Most of it really is all of those technical things, those behind the scenes things. I spent days making a program for a show a few months ago. Like, you have to be a jack of all trades, and you have to be willing to do all of that detail oriented work. And if you're not, then maybe directing isn't for you, and that's okay. Like, not everybody is cut out to be a director. It sounds fun, and it is fun if you are the type of person that can handle multitasking in a lot of different areas, a lot of different things. Okay, some of the most difficult things about directing for community theater. This is a little bit different than somebody that might be directing something in educational theater or professional theater. In community theater, you're constantly having to worry about scheduling and people dropping out. Usually because of scheduling reasons. People have jobs and they're doing this as a volunteer thing for community theater. And so anytime you're casting someone in a show, there's the chance that they have something that comes up with their family or with their work that is going to make them either miss rehearsal or miss the show altogether. And that's one of the most stressful things about directing for community theater. I have only done one production in community theater where I didn't have to recast a role because somebody dropped out, of all the things I've directed. So going in, you have to have a plan. You have to have things in mind that you want to do and people that you are casting, but you also have to always be thinking about every possibility to replace, fix, whatever. Currently, right now, I'm directing a show at Abbey Players. I'm directing Xanadu at Abbey Players. And with this coronavirus going on, I don't know who's going to be available to actually be in the show by the time we can potentially put the show up. So what am I doing? I mean, I'm learning choreography to make sure that if something happens and I need to go up there, I can. So it's just, you have to be thinking of plan A, plan B, plan C through the whole thing, because community theater is very flexible in who's going to be available and who's going to be coming to your rehearsals. We'll talk more about this during casting, because for me, it's a very important part of casting, because I like my people that I cast to actually stay with the show to the end. So we'll cover that more in a future episode/lesson. But that's something I want you to keep in mind, that being a director is stressful, and a lot of it has to do with scheduling and with people who quit your show. So know what you're good at, get help, delegate, organization and communication, and it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to delegate, but be prepared to make a decision once you delegate. If someone comes to you and says, you know, these are the 2 costumes that I've come up with for this particular character, which one? Be prepared to pick. Be prepared to make a decision on every aspect of the show. And it's okay to ask them, what do you think? What's your justification behind this? But you are the final say. Whatever goes on that stage, you are the person who has chosen all of those decisions. And so it is a representation of you and your vision. So claim that and make sure that it is what you want, what you see for the show, and that you're serving the show. That's the most important thing, that you're serving the show, that you're serving the script, and that you're putting something up that represents your vision and what you're proud of. So those are all the important things to being a good director. Get together a good team, people that balance you out, your weaknesses and your strengths. Communicate, completely communication, organization. Know all of the difficulties going in and all of the things that you may be required to do, and that there may not be fun. And realize all of those things. Don't go into directing with this idea that I'm just going to put on a show to cast my friends, and it's the show that I've always loved and I just can't wait. All of those things could be true, and all of those things could absolutely happen. But if you think that that's all it is, then you're probably not going to be serving the show. So that's what it takes to be a good director. Please put any questions on this video if you would like, and I will be happy to come back and answer them maybe in the next episode. I want to read a couple of more things from this book about being a director. Number 2, this is the starting point of direction in my book that I was talking about earlier. It says the director's core activity is communication. So just goes on to show that that's what you have to do. You have to be a good communicator. All right, moving on to play selection. Now, this is probably what a lot of people think of as one of the most fun parts of directing, is picking which show you're going to do. And I am always thinking about which shows I'm going to do, which my next show is. And I have a list that I keep every time I see a new show that I might be interested in directing at some point. I keep adding it to my list. But how could I add to my list if I didn't know shows? People really like to think about shows and that they've seen recently and think, oh, I would love to cast, you know, my friends in that. I know some great people to do that show. I just love that show. And so that's the show I want to do. And they never really get past that particular point. I'm going to challenge you to go out there and read plays, read musicals, and look into as many different shows as you can. Right now, you have tons of time. Go on YouTube, go on if you can afford the subscription to Broadway HD, and then if you can get on and find different scripts and stuff like that. I encourage you to go on and read, because you won't know what speaks to you really until you have a wide range of things that you've read or that you've seen. So, how do I do this? Well, when I was in college, I went through a play reading phase where I read like 300 plays in a year. And it was just something that I was ravenous about and I was super excited about. And I really wanted to see which plays and which authors and playwrights spoke to me. And so I have a huge library, you could say, in my head of plays that I've read and that I'm interested in directing, and that I know what kind of styles speak to me. And I encourage you to do something similar to that. As far as musicals go, that may be more difficult because we can't always find a lot of times a script of a musical online to read. And so, like I said, I've watched tons and tons and tons of movie musicals, as well as Broadway HD and things like that. But my other resource, it's really cheesy, y'all, but it has been my number one go-to for finding which musicals I want to direct and reading up a little bit more about them. It is called Let's Put on a Musical, and it's by Peter Felicia. He works for MTI, and I believe he writes for the New York Times and the New York Post. He writes articles and reviews of musicals, and the book, the current edition, does not look like this, I don't believe, but it is on Amazon, and it is my favorite resource for reading up on musicals. So what is in this book? Let me tell you. So he separates it by categories, and basically he does which musicals fit that category, and he gives you what you need, etc., for that particular musical. So the first chapter is called Why It's Good Old Reliable, and it's the classic musicals. And here's an example. Annie Get Your Gun is the first one in this particular chapter. It tells you who the creators are, so you know kind of where it's coming from. It tells you the background of the actual show, a very brief story synopsis. Like you can see right there, it's very short. Then it tells you what's good about it, what's not so good about it. It's called liabilities, what you might have to watch out for in this show. Recognizable songs, who you need for casting it, designated dances, sets, costumes, important props, so on and so forth, and where you can find cast recordings. So, honestly, I read through this for fun because I'm a complete nerd, but it divides this up. If you have one whole chapter is on, you have a lot of women. So it has a ton of musicals in here that are female heavy. You have a lot of men, a ton of musicals in here that are men heavy. You have an older group in your community, so on and so forth. So this is my favorite resource because I love to go through and I love to read about musicals, and I love to see what I might want to look into further. So I completely recommend this book, Let's Put on a Musical, Peter Felicia. Like I said, it is on Amazon. I also spent a lot of time on MTI browsing through their musicals and seeing what speaks to me, and just trying to get ideas. And I think that the more you know about, then the more effective your show selection process can be, because you have to expand that knowledge of your shows. I would say consider a play to start for your first directing if you absolutely can, because musicals are a whole nother animal. And a lot of people think, oh, well, musical is so fun, and it is. It is so much fun, but you are not only considering the acting and the blocking in a musical, you also then must consider the music, how you're going to provide the orchestration, and all of the dancing. So there's so much that goes into musicals that sometimes it's better to go ahead and start simpler. My very first play was a 3-woman, 90-minute, 1-act play. It was set in modern times, the set was minimal, and it was absolutely the right pick for me for my very first show. If you have the opportunity to do something like that, I wholeheartedly recommend that you do something like that, because if you're going with some enormous musical just to start with, it's going to be a challenge, and there are going to be things that pop up that you have to think about that are pretty difficult. So if you can at all start with a play, start with a play. Consider a small cast to start, because the more people that you have to worry about, remember we talked about scheduling and people dropping out, The more people that you have to worry about not showing up to your rehearsals, the more stressful it is. So if you can at all start with a play and start with a small cast so you have fewer people to manage, the better. I think that you should, when you're researching plays and musicals, I think it's good to watch movies and productions out there. But then I think it's good to put them away and let them kind of sit in the back of your mind, but not to use them as a reference for directing that show. Because I think sometimes we can get intimidated by that, and I think sometimes we can put ourselves in a box with that. Also, don't get intimidated by an original production of something that you've seen and think, well, there's no way I could ever do that. When you're seeing an original production of something or a Tony Awards performance or something like that, you think, I could never do that. An example would be something like The Lion King. The Tony Award performance, you know, they have the enormous elephant coming out there, and they have the beautiful puppetry and the masks and everything like that, and the lights, and you might be tempted to see that and think, there's no way I could ever do justice to The Lion King like that. You don't have to do what the original production did. Just because the original production might have had, 3 stories of something and all of this crazy stuff going on and a helicopter on the stage, you don't have to do that stuff. The only thing that you have to do is every word in the script, because it's licensed. Beyond that, if there's something that the playwright is requiring that you do, it is in the license. They will let you know. But to do Lion King, you are not required to have the puppetry. You're not required to have the enormous elephant, so on and so forth. Now, having said that, there are some shows where some things are going to be required, and you cannot ignore those particular things. If you're doing a chorus line, you absolutely need good dancers. You cannot put a chorus line up without having strong dancers, because it is a dance show about dancers auditioning for dance. So know going into the show what is absolutely required. If you're doing a show that has a racial component where the story is focused on a particular race's story and is telling that, you need to know ahead of time that you can fulfill those requirements and have people of a certain race to tell that story. If not, you're not serving the story. You can't do it just because you love it. We may love it, but we have to serve the story. So if the story is focused on a racial component, it is telling the story of race. For example, like Hairspray, you need to make sure you have the people to tell that story appropriately. So I would encourage you to look and see what are the things that are absolutely required for this show. What do I need to serve the story of this show? And what can I be creative with? I recently saw Come From Away, and I love it. Like, that is completely my directing style. Is something that is just completely abstract, people changing hats, changing shirts, and just working with only chairs and with only tables. That's completely my directing aesthetic. Remember, I said I'm not super strong at sets, so I really love the idea of using just chairs and tables and things like that for the production, and people playing multiple characters and not having to do big elaborate costume changes. I love all of that. But does Come From Away absolutely have to be done that way? No. You could have a larger cast, and you could have people playing all of those different parts. You don't have to do the double casting like Come From Away does on Broadway and on the West End. Be creative. There are so many different ways to see a show and to reinterpret a show. One example that comes to my mind is Pippin. The original Pippin was told as a almost a vaudevillian type production, and the Pippin revival was told as a circus. And Diane Paulus is the one that made that happen, the director. It was her vision, and she completely reinterpreted Pippin. You can do that with your shows as long as it still serves the script, as long as it still serves the story. You can reinterpret things and tell the story in a different way. So that's why I encourage you not to box yourself in with what you may have seen on a Broadway production or on a movie or something. People who try to put exactly what the movie was on stage, I think they end up letting themselves down because they aren't allowing themselves their own creativity, and because they're trying for something that's never going to happen. Live theater is flexible, is breathing, and is always changing. And if you are trying to box it into someone else's performance and someone else's production, then you're not serving the true purpose of live theater. So you need to let it be what your production is going to be. And as the director, you have the vision, you have the focus, do stuff that inspires you. That's my kind of third part of show selection. Number one, read it and see as much as you absolutely possibly can. Number two, don't feel honed in by what it is that you have read, be creative with it. And number three, completely do something that inspires you. I have a very, very wide range of things that inspire me. It may seem very eclectic to some people. Right now I'm directing Xanadu, which is the silliest thing on this earth. But in the fall, I directed a Stephen Sondheim review, which was very serious in some ways. And then I've directed Little Foxes, which is a drama. Last summer I directed Snoopy. My tastes kind of run the gamut, but the thing that all of those shows had in common was they inspired me in some way. They told some message, some story that I feel makes the world better by putting it out there. So I encourage you to pick shows like that. Don't pick shows just because you think that your community or your cast is going to like them. Pick things that you want to put out into the world as a director that inspire you, messages that you want to put out there. I really think that that's important. Also, know your style. We talked about this a little bit earlier in, what makes a good director and stuff like that. Like I said, I know my style is a very more minimalistic aesthetic and an abstract aesthetic. And so I do like shows like Come From Away. I would love to direct Come From Away at some point. I tend to select shows that really go with that sort of thing. I don't pick big elaborate set shows. Those aren't really things that inspire me because I know what I'm going to be good at and what I'm going to be good at putting on stage. But I know people who are excellent set designers and directors, and they love a big set and they love putting together something that has some very elaborate set that they can just wow the audience with. And more power to those people. Just know your aesthetic, know what you can pull off, know your style, and do what inspires you. Selecting for your community and for your particular production, for your particular company is also super important. Know who you have. Now, we're going to talk more about this with casting next week. But while you do not precast, I never precast, you need to have an idea of who is going to show up for your auditions. And that's not precasting. It's being smart. It's like I said, if you're going to do Hairspray, know who's going to show up for your auditions. And if you're not going to have the right people show up for your auditions for Hairspray, it's a bad show selection. Think ahead of time who is likely to come out. And if you don't know people who are likely to come out and you have to do this show, then you need to call around and ask people to come audition for your show. Again, it is not precasting. You can call multiple people for the same role, but you need to make sure that you can cast the shows that you've selected. I know some people who are like, well, we'll just see who shows up at auditions, and then the right people don't show up to auditions, and then they're forced cobbling together a show with people, and it's so much more difficult. And those people that they're cobbling together, remember I said the most difficult thing was people quitting your show? Yeah, they're the ones who are usually the first ones out the door because you're asking them to do something more difficult than what they may have originally signed up for, or they weren't passionate about it to begin with. So definitely know what you need going in. Your community, little pause there, sorry. For your community, I'm going to say definitely don't underestimate what your community can handle content-wise, but also don't go crazy with it. I think that if you talk to people in that company and in that community, you can get a good idea of what your community, what your company can handle putting on stage content-wise. And I think it's always good to discuss that with people ahead of time. People see all kinds of crazy stuff on television, and usually theater doesn't go anywhere near what television does, but there is something about seeing things on a live stage that is different than seeing it on your television screen. And so, but I would also say don't limit yourself. We did Next to Normal last spring at Abbey Players, and it sold very well, and it really resonated with that community very well, even though that is a very edgy show. So it's something to consider, but I would say don't think that you have to box yourself in for your community, for your company. So those are all my tips. I'm going to show you the books that I talked about again. Play Directing, Analysis, Communication, and Style by Frances Hodge. This is my directing textbook. It's excellent. And Let's Put on a Musical by Peter Felicia. This is my musical repertory or whatever reference guide that I go to find out all about the musicals. These are both available on Amazon, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them for you. If you have a particular show that you really love or are interested in, and you'd like to know what maybe the good things and the liabilities about that show, the considerations of it, please drop it in the comments below, because this is the sort of thing I love to geek out about. I love to talk about why shows would work and why they wouldn't. Sorry, another pause there. I love to talk about why shows would work and why they wouldn't, and what they have to be successful, and what you can do to be creative with that show. So please come back next week. I will be talking next week about casting and auditions. So that is a huge part of directing, and you don't want to miss that one. Thanks everybody for watching, and like I said, feel free to comment below with any questions that you have about anything I've said, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.